I was 8 years old the first time I heard the whispers coming from the basement. I had always been warned to stay away from that door, but when you live in a house like mine, curiosity becomes your only escape. My parents were strict, to say the least. My father was a towering presence, his voice always filled with rage, and my mother, she was colder, her punishments more calculated, more painful. "There's nothing down there for you, Lily," my mother would say, her eyes narrowing as she caught me glancing at the basement door. But the way she said it made me think there was something down there, something they didn't want me to see. The first time I heard the whispers, I thought I was imagining it. I was lying in bed trying to muffle the sound of my parents arguing downstairs. Their voices were sharp, filled with that same bitterness that always seemed to linger in the house. But then, beneath their yelling, I heard it, a soft, almost inaudible whisper, like a voice trying to reach me through the darkness. I crept out of bed, careful not to make a sound. The whispers were coming from the basement. The door at the end of the hallway seemed to beckon me, drawing me closer despite the terror clawing at my insides. My hands were shaking as I reached for the doorknob. I hesitated, remembering the last time I disobeyed my mother. The bruises had taken weeks to fade, but something compelled me to turn the knob. The door creaked open, revealing a staircase that disappeared into blackness. The whispers grew louder, more insistent, but I couldn't make out the words. It was as if they were speaking directly to my soul, bypassing my ears entirely. I started down the stairs, one step at a time, the cold air wrapping around me like a shroud. The basement was dark, the only light coming from the faint glow of the moon filtering through a small, dirty window. The whispers were all around me now, swirling in the darkness, pressing against my mind. I reached the bottom of the stairs and saw it, a small wooden door at the far end of the room, almost hidden behind old, rotting furniture. The whispers were coming from behind the door. I felt drawn to it, like something on the other side was calling out to me, begging me to come closer. I approached the door, my heart pounding so hard I could barely breathe. I knew I shouldn't be down here, that my parents would kill me if they found out, but I couldn't stop myself. I had to know what was behind that door. I reached out, my fingers trembling as they brushed against the rough wood. The door felt cold, unnaturally so, and the whispers intensified, filling my head with a cacophony of voices. They were louder now, and I could finally make out what they were saying. "Lily, help us." I froze. The voices weren't just whispers anymore. They were pleading, desperate cries for help, and they knew my name. I yanked my hand back, terror seizing my heart. I wanted to run, to get as far away from that door as possible, but my feet wouldn't move. It was like I was rooted to the spot, unable to escape the voices that were now screaming inside my head. "Please, Lily, let us out." I backed away, stumbling over my own feet as I scrambled for the stairs. The whispers turned to screams, echoing in the dark basement as I ran up the stairs two at a time. I slammed the door shut behind me, my breath coming in ragged gasps. The house was silent, my parents' argument having ended at some point while I was in the basement. The only sound was the blood rushing in my ears. I never told my parents what I heard. I knew they wouldn't believe me. Or worse, they would. But after that night, I couldn't stop thinking about the voices. Who were they? Why were they trapped behind that door? And why did they sound so familiar? The next day, I noticed something strange. My parents were acting different. They weren't yelling as much, and they barely looked at me. It was like they were avoiding me. I caught my mother staring at me with an expression I'd never seen before. Fear. As the days went by, I became obsessed with the basement door. I couldn't get the voices out of my head, their pleas for help echoing in my mind day and night. I started to have nightmares, waking up in a cold sweat with their screams ringing in my ears. Then one night, I couldn't take it anymore. I had to go back. I had to know the truth. I waited until my parents were asleep before creeping out of bed. The house was deathly silent as I made my way to the basement door. My hands were shaking as I turned the knob, but this time I didn't hesitate. I descended the stairs, the whispers growing louder with each step. When I reached the bottom, the door at the far end was wide open. The whispers were gone, replaced by a suffocating silence that pressed down on me like a weight. I stepped into the room, my heart racing. The air was cold, and I could see my breath in the dim light. I moved closer to the open door. The whispers were gone, replaced by a suffocating silence that pressed down on me like a weight. I stepped into the room, my heart racing. The air was cold, and I could see my breath in the dim light. I moved closer to the open door, my footsteps echoing in the stillness. As I peered into the darkness beyond the door, I felt something brush against my arm. I jumped back, but there was nothing there. I was alone, but the feeling of being watched, of something lurking just out of sight, was overwhelming. I reached out, my hand trembling as it touched the edge of the door. It swung open wider, revealing a small dark room. In the center of the room was a wooden crate, its lid slightly ajar. The air was thick with the smell of decay, and I gagged, covering my mouth with my hand. I knew I shouldn't look inside, but I couldn't stop myself. I had to know. I stepped closer, my heart pounding in my chest. I reached out, my fingers grazing the rough wood of the crate. With a deep breath, I lifted the lid. Inside, I saw the source of the whispers, small skeletal figures huddled together, their empty eye sockets staring up at me. They were children, their bones twisted and broken, their tiny hands reaching out as if begging for help. And then I saw their faces, faces I recognized. They looked like me. A scream tore from my throat, and I stumbled back, dropping the lid with a loud bang. The whispers returned, louder and more desperate than ever. "Lily, help us! Please!" I turned and ran, bolting up the stairs and slamming the basement door behind me. I didn't stop until I was in my room, the door locked behind me. I could still hear the whispers, faint but persistent, echoing in my mind. The next morning, I tried to pretend it was just a nightmare, a twisted figment of my imagination. But I knew the truth. The voices, the children in the crate, they were real. And they were trapped down there, in the basement, just like I had been trapped in this house my entire life. But now I was free. My parents had disappeared that night, and I never saw them again. The police searched the house, questioned me, but they found nothing. No trace of my parents, no evidence of what I had seen in the basement. But I know they're still down there. I can still hear their whispers. And sometimes, late at night, when the house is silent and the world is asleep, I hear them calling my name. And I wonder how long it will be before they come for me too.